Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a totally paradigm-shifting strategy from Improvement Pill that goes way beyond simple willpower and actually solves the root of behavioral addictions. Right, let's talk about that feeling of being completely, utterly stuck. You know the one. You swear you'll do better tomorrow, you wake up super motivated, but by 9 p.m., you're right back in that exact same destructive loop. It is emotionally exhausting. It chips away at your self-esteem, making you feel like you just lack discipline. But what if the problem isn't your discipline at all? What if the actual mechanics of how we approach quitting are fundamentally broken? Today, we're going to look at the underlying psychological mechanics of why we do what we do, and more importantly, how to actually escape this loop for good.
Okay, let's dive into this by asking a really crucial question. Why does the standard approach of just trying harder to quit an addiction almost always end in total frustration? I mean, we've all been there. You make a firm resolution, you grit your teeth, you block the websites, and you rely entirely on sheer willpower. And sure, for the first few days, it might actually work. You feel unstoppable. But eventually, willpower depletes. Think of willpower literally like the battery in your smartphone. When you wake up, boom, it's at 100%. But every stressor at work, every minor annoyance, every single time you resist a temptation, that battery drains. By the end of the day, when you're tired, lonely, or stressed out, that battery's hovering at like 1%. You simply don't have the juice left to fight the urge, and the cycle repeats itself. So why is willpower such a faulty tool for this job? And what actually works?
To uncover the answer, we have to look at Section 1, a famous behavioral study that completely flips our understanding of addiction right on its head.
Researchers really wanted to understand what drives compulsive behavior, right? So they set up an experiment with two very different groups of test subjects. They took the first group and placed them in an isolated environment. Picture a bare, empty cage. Nothing to do, no stimuli, no friends, just four walls and total isolation. Then, the second group was placed in an enriched environment. This was essentially a paradise. Plenty of space to play, toys, delicious food, and tons of social interaction. Now, both groups were offered an addictive substance, and honestly, the results were staggering. The isolated subjects, stuck in their boring cages, consumed the substance compulsively. It became their entire world. But the subjects in the enriched environment, they mostly ignored the substance entirely. Even when they tried it, they didn't get hooked. They preferred playing, socializing, and just living their lives. This perfectly illustrates a profound truth. The subject's environment and overall fulfillment dictated their addictive behavior, not just the addictive substance itself. It wasn't about the drug, it was about the cage.
Which brings us to Section 2, the discovery, and what we're actually missing in life when we fall back into these destructive habits.
This leads us to a foundational rule from the source material. It says, the best NoFap strategy is one that focuses on solving the root of the problem. Fighting the symptom, which is the addiction itself, is virtually useless if you don't address the root cause. Think of it like a garden completely overrun by incredibly stubborn weeds. If you walk out there and just snip off the top leaves, hey, your garden looks perfectly clean for a couple of days. But beneath the soil, the root system is completely intact, gathering nutrients and getting ready to sprout right back up. You can spend your entire life snipping leaves, which, by the way, is exactly what relying on sheer willpower is, or you can grab a shovel, dig deep into the dirt, and uproot the thing entirely. The addiction is just the leaf. We need to dig into the soil and figure out what is actually feeding it.
So, what exactly are those roots? Well, the missing elements in our lives usually fall into three main categories: deep human connection, a meaningful sense of purpose, and healthy stress relief mechanisms. These are absolutely fundamental human needs. We are wired to need a tribe, we're wired to need a reason to get out of bed in the morning, and we desperately need ways to decompress when life gets overwhelming. Addictions often just act as a band-aid, masking the absolute absence of these vital things. Imagine coming home to an empty apartment after a grueling, highly critical day at work. You feel chronically lonely, intensely stressed, and completely bored. Your brain sounds the alarm. It feels deep emotional pain and instinctively seeks out a quick, massive dopamine hit to numb that pain and fill the void. The behavior isn't the root problem. The isolation and the lack of purpose is.
Let's move to Section 3, rethinking the real goal. We're going to see how this builds into a complete mindset shift.
If we contrast these approaches, you'll see a massive paradigm shift. We have the old way versus the root cause way. The old way is what most people try first, relying solely on sheer willpower and restriction. It's a mindset of total denial, focusing entirely on what you absolutely cannot do. You tell yourself, I will not do this, I will not do that, and it creates this constant internal friction. You live in a state of anxiety, constantly battling your own desires. Honestly, it is deeply exhausting. Now consider the root causeway. The goal here isn't just restriction, it's about building such an incredibly fulfilling life and cultivating such strong positive habits that the addiction literally becomes obsolete. It just loses its appeal. You aren't white-knuckling your way through the day. Instead, you're so engaged with your friends, your hobbies, and your goals that the urge to escape simply evaporates. You're moving from an empty cage to an enriched environment.
And this brings us directly to Section 4, the best strategy for NoFap and overall self-improvement.
The source emphasizes this really cool concept called the Habit Builder Challenge. It's basically a systematic approach to replacing negative, void-filling behaviors with positive, fulfilling routines that address your underlying psychological needs. You aren't just leaving a massive empty space in your evening where your bad habit used to be because, nature abhors a vacuum. If you leave an empty void, the old habit is going to rush right back in. Instead, you're actively designing a new routine to fill that exact same void with something constructive. For example, if you realize you always fall into bad habits late at night because you're bored and restless, the Habit Builder Challenge involves purposely scheduling an engaging activity for that exact time block, like reading a gripping novel, practicing an instrument, or getting into a deep conversation with a friend.
So here is the actionable masterclass on how to actually execute this strategy. Step 1. Identify the trigger or the missing void. Pay close attention to exactly how you feel in the 20 minutes before the urge hits. What is the emotional catalyst? Is it walking through the front door after a highly stressful shift at work? Is it a feeling of intense loneliness on a Friday night? Or is it simply procrastination when you're facing a daunting project? You have to pinpoint the exact trigger. Step 2. Choose a healthy replacement habit that directly addresses that specific feeling. If the trigger is work stress, your replacement habit might be a 20-minute run to burn off cortisol or doing a guided meditation. If the trigger is loneliness, the replacement habit is calling a family member or joining a local club. Finally, step 3, systematically practice the new habit to resolve the root cause. Every single time that specific trigger hits, you must consciously pivot to the new healthy habit. Over time, you are quite literally rewiring your brain's default response mechanism.
But if you've been struggling with this, we need to look at Section 5, Building Better Habits, and the timeline of how this actually works.
It is vital to understand the psychological timeline of how lasting change actually takes root, because expecting instant perfection is a total trap. As this timeline visually maps out, building a habit happens in distinct phases. Let's look at day 1. The friction is incredibly high here. It feels completely unnatural. And yes, this is the one place where your willpower is absolutely needed just to get the engine turning and break that initial inertia. You really have to force yourself to go for that run instead of sitting on the couch. But stick with it, because as you push through to week 3, a massive shift occurs. You're building consistency and actively addressing those root causes. The new routine starts to feel familiar and the resistance drops significantly. And then, brilliantly, by month 3, you reach the holy grail, automation. The new healthy habits become completely automatic and the old urges drastically fade. You don't have to debate with yourself anymore, you just do it. The friction almost entirely disappears because you've successfully enriched your environment and healed the root cause.
To wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final provocative question to ponder. What specific, fulfilling new habit will you start building today to make your old addictions entirely obsolete? Seriously, think about the voids in your own life right now. The boredom, the stress, the isolation. What is one positive action you can take to start filling that void with real meaning? Remember, don't just fight the symptom. Enrich your environment, solve your root problem once and for all, and build a life you no longer need an escape from. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you on the next one.